Sometimes sports card prices might not make sense, at least not to the informed sports fan. The price gaps between players of similar ilk and similar resumes can be astounding, but at the end of the day, the market speaks with its wallet and dictates the data we report on. We need to decode the psychology of the market if we're going to predict the next Anthony Edwards rocket ship. Let's data dive. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Data Dive powered by Market Movers. My name is Tyler Nethercott, better known as Teapot, and boy oh boy, has Ant-Man's insane run-up been a sight for sore eyes. I feel like it's been a minute since we've seen a basketball player's card prices hop onto a rocket ship and head for the moon after being on a steady decline for quite some time. This situation is different than Wemby's. First off, Wemby's commodity cards, the highly liquid ones that trade daily, have actually been on a steady decline. His volume is strong, his high-end market is insane, but overall his commodity card prices have been cratering. Now this Ant-Man phenomenon is something entirely different. He has captivated the minds and hearts of the hype beast participants. He's funny, he's competitive, he's cocky, and he's looking for any excuse he can to put you and your Aunt Betty on a poster. And as of recording this video, he's up 2 games to none on the finals favorite Denver Nuggets. And you know what? He's not the only one whose prices are up. Jalen Brunson is having a nice little run up himself as well. And guess what? In our last member live stream in April, old Teapot was asked the question by one of our members on my dark horse NBA finals picks. And what did I say? Minnesota and New York. And yes, a 3 and a 2 seed were massive underdogs with Vegas. So they do count as dark horses. So today, we're going to look at some patterns. Anthony Edwards was the first overall pick in 2020, and he's living up to the billing. Brunson was a very rare second rounder who's a bona fide superstar at this point, drafted 33rd overall in 2018. It's a tale of 2 stories and a tale of 2 very different price trajectories. And we can use their journeys to help you make money in the future with other players. As always, this video is brought to you by Market Movers. And did you know we have monthly member live streams with free cards and free packs just given away? It's open to all the members. Jeff and I just shoot the stuff, answer questions, and we play sports card trivia. There's a prize if you beat me in that trivia. It's a ton of fun. Visit marketmoversapp.com and use promo code DIVE when you check out. You'll get 14 days completely free to try it out, and then 20% off for life as long as you're subscribed. Now let's get into the data. All right, so I'm actually really excited about this video. Shout out to my guy Parker from my data team for helping me conceptualize this one. There's gonna be a lot here. This might be a little bit longer video, but I think you're really gonna wanna stick around because I'm gonna cover a lot of ground, philosophical stuff, trends, and then looking to the future with maybe some predictions. So let's start out here. I've got this blank blue slide. I wanna talk about the attributes of the type of player who has potential to get that it factor and see their prices go up. Let's call it in the short term and potentially even to sustain value long term over time. The first thing is age. Age is very important. While we love to see players stay with their colleges and play for 4 years and compete in March Madness if you're into NCAA basketball, that does not bode well for players in the NBA. If you come into the NBA at age 22 or 23 and it takes you 3, 4, 5, 6 years to reach your peak potential late into your 20s, the chances of you being, considered one of the all-time greats today, very slim, in my opinion. It's hard to get hype behind them. We've seen a lot of players. Think of a guy like Domantas Sabonis, he's a solid all-star caliber player, but he's, I think, 28 years old. He's later in his career. He's finally coming into his own. It's not enough. It's too little, too late. We need these guys to be young coming into the NBA, 18, 19, maybe 20 years old at the most when they're starting their careers. And I look at a guy like Anthony Edwards, who right now, he's only 22 years old still, and he's putting up incredible numbers. So age is really important. Draft pedigree. What do I mean by draft pedigree? Generally, it helps a lot for a player to be a lottery pick, and not just a lottery pick, but a top 5 pick to really be considered an all-time great. Now, we've got Anthony Edwards, who was the first overall pick, but you said, well, also Jalen Brunson is going up significantly in price. Yes, but their prices aren't even close right now. Not even close. I think Brunson's trading for, like, I don't know, 1/5 of what Edwards Prism Silver and other cards are going for right now. And it's because he was a second rounder. He's got a mountain to climb. He has to solidify himself in the minds of the hobby, participants for them to take him seriously and actually go, you know what? This guy's actually really, really, really good. It's also hard to go on like a Prism Silver PSA 10 from $50 up over $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 over time. That's going to take time. He's going to have to do some other things to get that price to go up. Team dynamics. This is huge. In order for a player to have really strong value, they have to be the guy on their team. The guy. If not the guy, for sure the second guy. And if they're the second guy and they don't have the runway to become the guy, think about somebody like Klay Thompson or certain other dynamics, Scottie Pippen. Their prices, they're never gonna like really shoot up into that upper echelon if they're never the guy. There are people who think that Scottie Pippen was maybe one of the 5 to 7 best players in the NBA during his career, during that run with the Bulls, but people don't think of him that way because he wasn't the guy for the Bulls. That was very clearly, obviously, MJ. So team dynamics are really important. You get a high draft pick, you need to bring them in. They need to have a runway to become the guy on the team in order to stand out. Athleticism is really important, I think. They need to be able to do a little bit of everything. If they're sort of one-dimensional, if they're not explosive, they're not fun to watch, that can be really problematic. Also, you take some of these young guys who are incredibly athletic, we talk about this a lot, upside. It's not enough. Think back to a guy like Darius Bazley, who was super athletic, or so many other players. It's not the only thing, but it definitely helps with a foundation while they continue to develop their skills, their court awareness, other things, their jump shot. So athleticism is a great foundation. Stats are really important. You've got to score. First and foremost, you've got to score points. You can't be a guy averaging, 16 and 16. You've got to get that point total really up above 25 points per game. That to me is like the bare minimum of where you got to be scoring. In order for people to take you seriously, you've got to put the ball in the hoop. Play style, very important. You've got guys who do a little bit of everything. You've got guys who just shoot threes. Maybe they score in volume, but the ones who really stand out are the ones who get those highlight reel dunks. They posterize people. They have big blocks. Ant-Man, athleticism, stats, play style. He ticks all the boxes so far, frankly. Persona. I can't think of anybody in the NBA right now who embodies this one more than Anthony Edwards. And this is what I think is really kind of setting him apart or putting him on a trajectory where people are talking about this being his league in the years to come, potentially, more than even some of the other guys we're seeing, being Luka, Shea, and others. Persona is really important, the character, the personality, how do they play? And he's like countercultural at this point, where all these other guys are talking about load management, I don't want to play back-to-back games, and blah, blah, blah. What is Anthony Edwards saying? If he could change one thing, it would be that players aren't sitting out. He's got that same mindset that Kobe and MJ had, where he wants to play for the fans who pay good money, who maybe travel from out of town, or who wait for Minnesota to come into their city because they want to see him compete and play. If these guys don't play, it's a huge disappointment to the fan base. And arguably the most important thing, actually, I would say a non-negotiable in basketball, winning. You have to win, and not just win playoff games, you have to win championships. For long-term value, you have to win championships. Winning is everything. It's what gets you into the GOAT conversation. If you're not winning, you're not going to go anywhere. All right, another slide here. There's different strategies and different price trajectories based on where you're drafted. So let's go back to that draft pedigree. If you are drafted, if a player is drafted in picks 1 to 5, one of the highly touted players, or in picks 6 to 14, they need to be somewhere between generational and superstar, really by year like 4. Year 4 to year 5 in the league. They better be either on that path squarely and continuously improving, or already into that slot, or what you're going to see is their prices are going to come out super high, just as every top draft pick does. And they're just going to come down and down and down and down and down and down. They'll keep going down. If they don't hit that status by year 4 or 5, they will just keep going down over time. I'm worried about somebody like Cade Cunningham with that, for example, on my Detroit Pistons. So they have to do that. Even then, they're going to come down and then they'll level out. And then if they start to really solidify themselves, they'll start to come back up toward those original highs. And we'll see that. I'm going to show you charts that prove this. Pick 15 to 30, they better be a star. And what do I mean here? They're trying to retain value. This is like short-term value. Let's call this that same time frame. The years 3 to 7 in the league. If they were a later draft pick, they have an opportunity to run up. They're going to come out hot. They're going to go down. You start looking at their cards in year 2 to 3 in the league and you see potential. You need them to at least be I'll call it an all-star level. I really should have put all-star on this. And then second round, at first I just wrote on here, just don't. Just don't with second round players. But I would say at best, tread very carefully. Tread carefully because very, very few. I'm talking like 1 in every 8 to 10 draft classes have a meaningful second round draft pick who holds value or who becomes superstar caliber player in the league, like a Jalen Brunson. So keep that in mind. And I've got him here. If you haven't seen this ridiculous ad on Instagram or other places for Catalina Crunch, I think Jalen's going to want to stick to basketball because his acting skills, not so dynamic. Now, what's your strategy when it comes to these types of players? If you're trying to speculate on lottery picks, let's call them lottery picks, follow the hype herd. Listen, put your ear to the ground and listen to what other people are saying, because that mass opinion, that popular public opinion, is going to dictate the value. I honestly hate this. I want to be sneaky. I want to be shrewd and astute and have my own ideas about who's going to pop off. But the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter. If people aren't talking about a guy, even if he's putting up 25, 7, and 7, and nobody's talking about him, his prices won't go anywhere. They just won't go anywhere. Whereas if they're talking about a guy and you hear it and you hear it and you hear everybody, hey, what are you buying? What are you buying? Get into our Discord server with 30,000 users. See what people are talking about, because those are the types of players that are going to move. I'll probably have to make another video looking ahead to the National this year for football, because that's what happens. You should be listening right now saying, who are people talking about that they're excited about going into next season, and just get in on those players early enough before they peak out in value. Different strategy with second half of the first round and second round players. I would say trust your instincts here. With those second round players, maybe hold their cards. Don't do anything with them. Just hold them and see if any of them pop off early enough to get you value. But follow your gut. You have a little more freedom here. You can get in at lower price points, or if you're into ripping wax or buying into breaks, you can keep those guys, and those are the ones that can feel really good long term in that sort of later price range. Okay, that's that slide. Well, we've got a lot more ground to cover here, so I'm going to keep going fast. I've got some summary stats here for you on pricing. These are Prism Silver PSA 10s, okay? I went back to 2013, Giannis's year. I did not do 2012 because that inaugural year had very low print runs, and it screws up everything, and everybody gets all crazy about it being the first year Prism. So we're looking at some stats. How many of the rookie players in those draft classes are over $50, $100, $200, $300, and then what's the max selling price for a card in each of these draft classes? Even 2013, bit of an anomaly, very few parallels, much lower pop counts in general, and obviously those were climbing up over time. So this is not an apples to apples, but I want to demonstrate a point. There are only 2 players from that 2013 draft class whose Prism Silver PSA 10s are selling for over $50, and one of them is Giannis at $8,400 recently. So that is take note of that. Of all the players in that draft class, only 2 of them still have a PSA 10 Prism Silver selling for over $50. Compare that to 2023, 17. 17 players from the most recent draft. This is the recency bias thing. I always talk about this, keep it in mind. You see 3 players from 2014, 7 from 15, 8, 9. Then we, surprisingly, much to my surprise, we dropped down to 6 in 2018, which I've argued in recent months is possibly the greatest draft class, at least since maybe 2003 or 1996. Only 6 players over $50. 2019, 3. The most disappointing draft class of the last 20 years, in my opinion, is 2019. And then we start seeing these numbers going up, 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 so they haven't started to fade off. And you can see this attrition. So if I slide over to this chart, this is all color-coded. This blue line, you can see, generally getting smaller over time. What that means is it's the proof. It's the proof in the numbers, this attrition curve for the value of players' cards as they fade into obsolescence, as they fade into irrelevance, and the next guy up, the next crop of players comes up. So we've got Giannis at 8,400, Embiid under 600, Jokic 3,300, Jamal Murray, Tatum, Luka, Zion, Anthony Edwards. We got to get into these numbers. Cade, Chet, and Wemby. Those are the ones leading the pack so far this year. Now, if I get into this, we'll just quickly go through and I'll show you some of these numbers. There is a massive, massive gap between Jason Tatum, Donovan Mitchell, and De'Aaron Fox. This is incredible. 850 for Tatum, 180 for Donovan Mitchell, 138 latest sales for De'Aaron Fox. And we're going to jump over and look at their stats. Let's compare their stats. They're not very different. Tatum, 26.9 points per game. Mitchell and Fox, 26.6. Their scoring is nearly identical this year. Total rebounds, who cares? Nobody cares. Maybe people look at rebounds and assists combined, different positions, forward versus guards. Similar overall output. Defensively, maybe a similar impact. I think when you look at steals, blocks, stocks, as people call them. And then you look at effective field goal percentage. Very similar between Donovan Mitchell and Tatum, slightly lower on Fox. This has everything to do with it being the Boston Celtics and that winning factor. Big market team, one of the most iconic teams in the NBA. And then this, whole thing where Tatum's winning, he's winning. The Kings are out. The Cavs are trying to compete. They probably don't have a chance to really get around to the next round, but we'll see. Maybe they do. So very interesting, matchup between these card prices. And this is where, in my intro, I said sometimes it doesn't make sense entirely, but the market speaks, and so you can't really argue with it. Maybe it does make sense. Here we've got Luka, $1,100 versus $515 for Shea, $330 for Brunson, $129 for Trae Young, who largely people are forgetting about now. So let's look at those four players and their stats. Similar thing. I mean, Shea's stats are unbelievably gaudy, but not to the level of Luka's. So you're talking about an almost nearly double price difference. Jalen Brunson just putting up unbelievable numbers in the playoffs. All very, pretty strong from Brunson to Shea to Luka in terms of effective field goal percentage. But Luka has had that pedigree impact. There's still like so much money put into his cards that the market collectively refuses to let them crash. His prices have come down massively. Shea's have come down, and then they started to go back up because he didn't have the same expectation. Brunson's have gone up gradually over time. So very different dynamic between those two guys. Let's shift down and look at the next class. I mentioned this 2019, just very disappointing in general. You got Zion and Ja. Their card prices have done this since 2019. You had Zion here and Ja, then Ja was way above him. Going to be really interesting to see how these play out over time. And then you got Garland and Tyler Hero, who statistically, again, are pretty similar. I'm going to skip over showing those. I have them pulled up, but I want to keep going. But statistically, not the biggest differences between these four guys to justify this huge gap, but it's all about them having that pedigree and people thinking that the potential is there still long term. And then we'll look at Anthony Edwards, Tyrese Halliburton, Tyrese Maxey, and LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball down to $270, down below Maxey. Halliburton at $350, $360. He's kind of struggled in the playoffs. He did not have a good game one. And Ant-Man has just absolutely skyrocketed recently. So let's take a look real quickly at their stats, and I'll close these couple of tabs. It's all about efficiency with Halliburton. I mentioned that number, 25 points per game. Well, he was only at 20 this season, but he's leading the league, I believe, in assists, or he's up there for the top 2 or 3. He's only turning the ball over like twice per game, so an insane assist to turnover ratio. Fantastic 57% effective field goal rate. He shoots from 3 really well. Overall, he's a fantastic player, but he doesn't have that same it factor as Anthony Edwards. His jump shot doesn't look great, so that's really important to take note of, just that style of play. Ant-Man's taking the reins very much in that regard. So I'm going to close this. Here's the notable guys from these draft classes. And what's interesting is Edwards now the most expensive of these by a lot, actually, at this point. And he actually doesn't lead in a single statistical category. So this is where that it factor, that run up, that winning, and the potential. He's young. Again, he's 22 years old. He's the youngest of any of these players, significantly so. So people are looking at his trajectory in the coming years and saying that they're really excited about that. So let's look at these prices. We got Edwards. Throw Wemby into the mix at over $1,000 right now. Obviously, people really excited about him. And we'll just kind of continue to scroll down. We just looked at all of these guys, so you can kind of see where these things stand. This Gary Payton one always cracks me up because there's only 12 of these, and he has kind of a cult following. So I'm going to close that tab. Let's look at price trajectories for #1 overall draft picks, shall we? Or highly ranked draft picks anyway, top tier draft picks. We got Anthony Edwards. These are their raw prisms, by the way. I like to say right when they hit the market and they come out. Anthony Edwards' raw prism is down 64% from where it released a few years ago. Now remember, we had the crazy run up of, second half of 2020, first half of 2021, where everything was nuclear. So that definitely is a factor in that. We've got Cade. Cade's down 92% on his Prism Silver Raw from where it released. Jalen Green down 94%. Banchero down 73%. Wemby down 46%. And I expect that to continue to come down and follow this trend. Zion down 94%. What's the message here? With lottery picks, early lottery picks, be very, very, very careful. Don't buy into those cards early and start paying for them on the secondary market and expect to make money. It's going to be really hard to time. Yes, we saw Wemby's prices. They dipped and then they shot up. So there was money being made, but I said it a month or two ago, about 2 months ago, I said, be really careful because these cards will start to come down. I'm just telling you what the data shows, and there's enough of this proof over time to see that this is the case with every single player who is a high draft pick whose prices are expensive. So now we shift. What about players who are in that second half, the second half of the draft, later draft picks, second round, whatever? I would say hold them. Hold their cards. You're not going to sell them for a ton of money. Maybe if you get them right away, you move them because you can kind of get that high point in time in the market. But otherwise, let them sit in a box and be ready to move them. Maybe send them to ComC and get ready to price them and have them listed, something like that. Because here's a guy, Eric Paschal, Kevin Porter Jr., Darius Baisley, okay? These guys all had these huge run-ups, but do not expect them to hold over time. And the odds that these guys are going to pan out, I'm telling you, are very low. Almost in any case. I would even argue that if you had Jalen Brunson cards, even if you somehow expected him to be where he is today, I would have sold them at the first run up, to where his card prices started to shoot up. Because if you spread that out over all these players, you're much better off and going to make money long term selling those in the short term, and then just buy them back later when they come down if you really like those guys. So let's talk about Ant-Man and his price trajectory. This is going back to 2021 when these cards first hit the market, and you can see, yes, there was rocket fuel, jet fuel on card prices back then. Only now has he started to shoot up. And so this is kind of on a rolling weekly average, this chart is, which is why this says 5.5, $1,400 this week. But the last sale is supposedly $1,600 on a best offer on eBay. This thing is, his card prices are going absolutely crazy. So you see this pattern. Let's do the last 365 days. And it was like, kind of flat, kind of up, little bump, down, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, maybe the Wolves actually are for real. Maybe they can actually compete. Up 2 games and won both games on the road at Denver after barely missing the 2 seed themselves in the West and losing that home field advantage to Denver. It doesn't seem to have mattered at this point. Brunson is a very, very different story here. This card, you can see, he's actually come up over the last few years. Now, I will say, we didn't have his raw card in Market Movers all the way back. So this data isn't going back to when this card released in 2018, but it does go back to 2020, and you can see it's a very different trajectory overall. He had this big run up back when he played well with the Mavs in the playoffs, and then he kind of came down really quickly. Is he going to follow that trajectory now? This is all going to depend on whether or not the Knicks make it to the finals. If the Knicks make it to the finals, even if they lose, I think he will stay somewhere in at least this price range on his PSA 10 Prism Silver. I think he's going to kind of hover back in here. If they lose, this round especially, then I would expect them to come down potentially further. It just depends. But Brunson seems to be for real. The Knicks are playing incredibly well as a team. They've got depth, and they're gritty. And I'm excited. I like watching him. I like watching my guy Dante DiVincenzo. Both of them really exciting. So once again, we spread out these prices. Anthony Edwards has just shot up to $1,600, well above the pack now. Luka being second at $1,100. You've got Shea at $600, Tatum at $850, Brunson $300, and Halliburton around $350. So these are kind of the it guys right now that we're looking at in the playoffs. So now let's look ahead. Let's look ahead. Let's look at 2021 and 2022 and kind of talk through these. So this is the draft from that year. I've sorted it by points per game since they've been in the league. Cade Cunningham, I wish I could say at this point that I believe. I thought he was one of the guys with breakout potential this season, and he just didn't do it. He just didn't do it. I love you, Cade. I really am rooting for you, believe me. But at this point, I'm having a hard time believing. I haven't seen enough. Incredibly inconsistent, not playing great defense, not shooting the ball particularly well, turning the ball over. Inconsistency, really, and I get it. It's hard to go out night after night and keep losing and losing and losing. But you've got to rise to the occasion and get your team rallied around you and take the reins. And he's such a chill guy. He doesn't really have that charisma and persona either. So I actually see a scenario where Cade runs out his rookie contract and then goes to some other team, and he's not the guy. Maybe he's the second or third guy on the team. Maybe he's a good scoring option, combo guard. I'm having a hard time seeing him as the guy. Jalen Green, on the other hand, Jalen Green impressed me this year through stretches, but he was very, very inconsistent, and we're going to look at that in a minute. Franz Wagner, sorry, Chad Blez, I don't see Franz ever rising to the top of the crop and being the guy. First of all, Paulo Banchero's in the way there. There's other players on that team. He's a role player. He's a good player. He's very good, in fact, I think, but he's not ever going to be the guy. I don't think he's exciting enough. Scotty Barnes, sometimes doesn't even look like he knows how to play basketball. He looks like he's still growing into his body. He's lumbering around the court. He's missing layups, but then he goes out there and has these really good games. But I see him and RJ Barrett now almost like being the same player on that team, with Barnes being slightly better. And I don't see either of them standing out in my mind and sort of showing up as like an it guy in the league. Evan Mobley, more of a defensive force. He's a big man. He's like 6'11". He's a valuable player to have on your team. Unless he can take his scoring insanely to the next level, I don't see him doing it. Şengün is a guy I want to talk about for sure, and we're going to make some comparisons and look at him. Cam Thomas, just don't do it. He's a volume shooter. He's not particularly efficient or consistent. He's in a situation where they need somebody on that team to get him buckets, so he just shoots a lot. I wouldn't do it. Giddey, don't do it. He's not going to be the guy in Oklahoma City. Kuminga, I talked about in my kind of 10 bold predictions for the NBA season, and I said I thought the Warriors might miss the playoffs. And I said I thought that the Warriors dynasty was over. And I was right about both of those things. And I said that I thought Kuminga had a chance to become the guy. Now, for the first half of the season, he was barely playing. And then he had this supposed beef with Steve Kerr. He was asking for a trade. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Well, he showed up. He showed up in the second half of the season. So we're going to look at him. The rest of these guys, no. I don't see any of these guys rising to the top of the crop. I could be wrong. But I don't see none of these other guys intrigue me at all. So let's look at Jalen Green's game log. I love this on ESPN because they summarize the monthly stats, which in my opinion is really useful. So he had this month in April where he was averaging 28 a game. He was shooting 41% from three, 50% from the field collectively. He was grabbing 6 boards. He had 4 assists. He can dunk. He's got that it factor. He can fly. I mean, this guy can really dunk. He is incredibly athletic. Obviously, if he can get this going and the Rockets can start winning games, big question mark because the West is so competitive, but we've seen what Minnesota and Oklahoma City have done in terms of turning their franchises around. This was a really good month, but the problem is inconsistency. 16 a game the month before that, and then closed out the season here in April. So actually, sorry, that was March when he had a really good season. This is April. 17 points a game. Again, and the shooting back down to 38%, and the three-point shooting 29%. We've got to see consistency from him. But of these guys right now, his Prism Silver prices actually are not the most expensive. He's cheaper than Cam Thomas, for Pete's sake. So Pop 579, $146. He's an interesting play, in my opinion, to see how he does. Şengün's the other interesting one. He got injured during the year. He's still very young, 21 years old. So let's jump over. And here's the comparison that everybody, it's like the Pokemon evolution tree. We see this from Şengün to Sabonis to Jokic as the mature Pokemon. Well, obviously Jokic is the guy, and he's arguably the best player in the NBA at this point. Here's their stats. So you show these 3 guys. I don't ever see a guy like Sabonis, who's, like I said, 28 years old, emerging at this point. He's a very good player. I wouldn't be touching his cards whatsoever. Let's look in their 21-year-old seasons, Şengün versus Jokic, and the number's pretty close. 5 more points per game for Şengün. The scoring efficiency not quite the same, but 5 more points per game. Similar rebounds, similar assists, similar steals and blocks. All things very similar other than that championship caliber. We just don't know. Can Şengün continue to develop? I will tell you, he has fantastic court vision. I would put Şengün in the top 10 passers in the NBA right now. Maybe top 15, but if you watch him, his court vision is incredible. He's dropping dimes. He just doesn't have the usage to generate these triple doubles necessarily like Jokic does regularly, but he could get to that point if they get another guy, or if Jalen Green emerges. And the last guy I want to look at, Jonathan Kuminga. Like I said, if we scroll down early in the season, you can see preseason, and then all of a sudden it was like, okay, October, 11 points per game, 11 points per game, 14 points per game, boom, 21 points per game. They start putting him in the starting lineup. They start using him more. Clay is struggling, and he's playing very well. 40% from 3, 59% shooting. He's rebounding. He plays defense, halfway decently. I think he could continue to learn things, and he's mentoring maybe with Draymond in that regard. 18 points per game, 19 points per game. Closed out a little weak in the regular season, but that was only 4 games. And actually this one, kind of a weird fluke, was 0 points. But Kuminga is a guy who's still very young. Again, the age factor. He's 21 years old. He was the 7th pick overall. I think he's got a lot of potential. And if we scroll down, I like to see progress. We've got his per 36, 22 points per game, and a per 36 for the season is not bad. And if that was in the second half of the season, it would be much higher. Okay, last group of players to look at. We're going to go really quickly here. This is the 2022 class. We got Paolo, Chet, Jalen Williams, Shaden Sharp, Benedict Mathurin, Jaden Ivey, Keegan Murray, Eason, Jabari Smith, scrolling kind of down, and then Jalen Duren I'll make note of here. I'm going to look at 4 guys, 2 who I think have some interesting upside, 2 who I would be really careful with. The first one, Jalen Williams. I called him out before this season. This is another one I got right, guys. I don't always screw up. I probably missed more than I hit, but I did call him out, and I thought he was going to have a breakout season. Let's go down and look at his per 36 performance on Basketball Reference. And he went from 17, under 17, up to 22. He shoots the ball really well, 43% from 3, 54% shooting. Really good for a guard. He is the unsung hero, in my opinion, of this Oklahoma City Thunder team. He's the one that's helping take them up to that #1 seed. Yes, Chet's awesome. Yes, Shea is, generationally good. But Jalen Williams is hugely important to that team's success. I would keep an eye on his prices. Let's go back and look and see. $199. So Jalen Williams, does he have the potential to develop into the caliber of player like a Jalen Brunson? Probably not. Maybe he's a little too expensive right now. I probably wouldn't buy him in this particular moment. But if I see his prices dip down under 140 going into the summer potentially, I think he's a really intriguing play to look at. The other one is another Jalen. When in doubt, invest in Jalen's, I guess. We've got Jalen Duren, obviously for my Pistons. And the thing is, I just hear NBA players constantly talking about how good this guy is and how young he is. He's only 20 years old. 14 points per game isn't super exciting, but he's a double-double machine, 12 rebounds. He's incredibly athletic. Detroit needs somebody to step up. The big question is, can he get his scoring repertoire improved at all whatsoever? He doesn't have an outside shot. He's not a particularly great free throw shooter, though he did improve it. I guess 79% is pretty good for the season, but he's not getting to the line an incredible amount. So he may turn out to be more statistically like an Andre Drummond. I love Drummond, but he's very, very young. So keep an eye on him. I would not be buying his cards necessarily right now either. If we scroll back down, let's take a look. Jalen Duren at, $56 for a PSA 10? Maybe. I'm going to keep an eye on that. Because I do think he's going to be one of the guys in Detroit that stays there. They're going to want to lock him up. Isaiah Stewart, I would be selling. Jalen Duren, I might be buying. So Benedict Mathurin and Keegan Murray. Murray can shoot. Mathurin regressed this year. Anytime I see a guy regress, that concerns me. From 17 points down to 15 points per game. Minutes were down a little bit. So basically flat, you could argue. Maybe he's pretty much flat. But at this point, they've got Siakam. They've got Halliburton. They've got Miles Turner. They've got other players on that team. Obi Toppin showing, they have people. So I'm not necessarily sold on Mathurin. I don't think he's got a chance to be the guy on that team. And same thing with Keegan Murray. I think he's a good shooter. I think he can go out there and potentially have like a 10 3-point game, 30 points. He can give you that performance, but he's, to me, nothing more than a sharp shooter. I wouldn't really be investing in his cards unless something significantly changes with the Kings. And then I just want to point out one last thing here. All these prices are down. This is PSA 10 Prism Silvers from this year. And look at the red. Price change down 59%, 65%, 17, red. One green, Julian Strother. I'm going to be honest, I don't even know who that is. He's apparently up in value. Red. All these guys red, other than Andre Jackson Jr. because he was athletic and posterized somebody during the season, so people like him, I guess. Point of the story there is, be really careful. Give these guys some more time to mature before you start putting significant money into them. They're not the ones blowing up right now. Ant-Man and Brunson are. Look to a few years back and try to identify those opportunities. So what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Is Ant-Man still a buy right now? Is Brunson a buy? Who do you think is going to make it to the finals? And who do you think from the 22 and 23 draft classes, or the 21 and 22 draft classes has potential? I always love to hear from you. While you're down there, make sure to like this video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, share it with a friend who loves NBA. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, happy investing, keep on collecting, and make sure to have fun.